Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today I'll be speaking with Colleen Marshall, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, vice president of clinical care at Two Chairs, and a colleague of mine from the Motivational Interviewing network of trainers. She's passionate about leadership, effective leadership, and how an approach like motivational interviewing might be brought to improving one's leadership style. And she's passionate about bringing compassion to leadership and organizations. And so I bring you Colleen Marshall. As you know, I've long been a Colleen Marshall fan, so I thought I would just see if I could get a chance to talk to you. So, and I wondered whether, if you could just begin by telling us a bit about yourself, I suppose, your journey from where you started to where you are now, depending on what you'd like to share. But what's the Colleen Marshall story so far?
That's a big question. So I'm a marriage family therapist by training. So really got into the profession wanting to do therapy, which I used to think was like shut the door, magic happens therapy. But quickly just kept being asked to be in a leadership role. And I'm a big believer in like your life sends you messages and you should probably pay attention to those messages. So every job I was in within 3 months or so of being in a job, I was promoted. So I took a very loud message that maybe I'm actually just supposed to be a leader and lead people that do clinical work. And that's really where my journey has been, as most of my career has been moving up sort of the chain from manager up to, the top role in organizations but always doing clinical work. It's always been therapy or coaching or MI-based telephone calls type stuff, but always with the core being we're helping humans improve their lives in some way. I was very fortunate when I was a new manager to have a leader. Dr. Orville Kuntz was my leader, who was a psychologist, but also had an MBA. And so he trained me really early on to always be thinking about how do you improve clinical programs and processes and clinical care. But at the same moment, how do you lead? How do you be a better leader? How do you think about management? We, had breakfast things where we would read Harvard Business Review articles with all of his managers and chat about them and apply them to our clinical work. So I always felt like my brain was being trained to think about both at the same time, like kind of always. And fortunately, while I was under his leadership, I also was introduced to MI, and I was mandated to learn MI, which I always find funny because it's like, because we had a contract with at-risk young women, and part of the risk and resiliency checkup or assessment we were doing, you had to do it using MI. So we had to go learn how to do MI so that we could do this assessment with these young women. And we're forced to it. It was contract. You had to, you didn't have a choice. And I remember going in thinking, I don't know why I need this. I have a master's degree. I'm licensed. Like, I'm a pretty good therapist. And the girls I'm seeing like me, and we do very well together. So I'm not sure why I have to go to this training. And then in the training, just sort of fell in love with MI, and also got really nice coded feedback around things that I thought I was doing that I wasn't doing, like affirmations in particular. They're like, you didn't do even one. And I was like, that's not right. I affirm people all the time. They're like, nope, not one. And I was like, well, that's not good. And so I was really attracted, from the beginning, about just what MI is. And then, I came back and I started trying it with these 16-year-old women. And it changed the dynamic in the room really overnight. Like, I'd stopped me being their mothers and lecturing them about, please stop using meth. It's not good for you and your teeth will fall out, to, what are you wanting from your life? And talk to me about what meth does bring to your life and what are you hoping for instead? And those kinds of conversations shifted. So because I sort of fell in love with MI and just got really involved in the Mint community and just have felt like my home there, and at the same time kept moving up this leadership ladder, it just always connected in my mind, that the two were not that different. Like really good leadership, or the way I define good leadership, sounds an awful lot like MI. It's really, creating the space to really, not to start with, genuine intention and real clear understanding of the person in front of you, but also clear about where are they wanting to go and what are they wanting for themselves and their career. And why is that? What's the blockers there? Which then brings ambivalence, and you can start thinking about how MI starts being useful and helpful to be listening for the right part of the conversation that moves towards hope, instead of what a lot of leaders do, I think, is get frustrated with their employees because they are so focused on the sustained stuff they're listening to. And knowing that like both are always in the conversation helped me really think about leadership differently. So that's a little bit of just sort of my journey of how MI sort of bled into my thinking about leadership, and then the two sort of took off together.
Yeah, great answer to my big question. Thank you. And there's a lot in there actually that I want to sort of go back to. And firstly, back to the beginning, because I just wondered, what do you think it was about you even in those early years that people picked up on, or felt that they wanted you, to do more, and the promotions happened and so on? I mean, do you feel like there were certain qualities there, certain characteristics, or were there skills that you already possessed? What are your thoughts there from the early days of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I guess honestly, I think I've always, been seen as a leader, like, in junior high, which here is, sixth, seventh, eighth grade for us.
Mm.
I was ASB president, which is all student body president. And, whenever I got involved in something, um, I, I just would always sort of move to the top. I think a bit is I'm outspoken. I, say my opinion. I tend not to be afraid of not being liked, I guess. Like, so I'll be the one to raise my hand and ask the CEO an uncomfortable thing. Not because I'm trying to put him on the spot, but I'm truly just curious. And I've always been curious, even when I was little, just always been, I need to understand the why and the story behind something. And then I can get behind it. So I think there's something about me that just has always been seen as sort of a leader. And then in those situations, I don't know that I had the skill, because I definitely can tell you stories where I was not a good leader and like managed people in a way that I feel bad about. And those people are still in the world today somewhere and probably see me and think, why did she write a book? She sucks, so, which is why compassion is so important.
Yes.
but, um, but I, but I do think there was like a tendency to like step forward, or a tendency to raise my hand, or a confidence even. Like, I think I always just thought, okay, like, fine, I can try, like, I'll give this a go. Like my first promotion was being a team leader for children that had been removed from their homes, and they were in our care in a short-term shelter. So, these are kids going through some really rough times. Like they just sort of been ripped out of their parents' homes because of abuse or neglect. And now they're living with, 46 other kids that also had just had that happen. And that was like my promotion, to be in charge of that living situation. And I was like, okay, like I'll give it a go. But, now I look back thinking like, what an idiot. Like you didn't even know what you were doing. And this is a pretty like scary situation of being, really in charge of these children that are really going through this hard time. And what do you know? Like, I only had a bachelor's degree even back then. So I don't know if that answers it, but I think there's something about like, I just sort of step forward always, and I'm eager to learn, always wanting to get better and better. And
Yeah, there's a sort of a confidence, as you say, or even courage, really. There's courage is sort of in the mix there, a willingness to step forward and so on, and to ask the questions, because curiosity is the other piece as well. There's sort of the courage and curiosity, but also it sounds like a very genuine, sincere desire to help others too. That's part of it as well. The curiosity isn't a kind of a gotcha thing. It's much more about this genuine desire to to just understand, work things out, make it better, that kind of thing. And some of those characteristics were with you even early on, and perhaps that was a little bit about others around you. I mean, you're also a little bit of a sponge. Sounds a bit mean, but you do soak up, I guess, the kind of the things that are said or discussed or offered by others around you, and that kind of, you take that on, and then that helps to shape the direction of things as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do. I mean, I think one thing so I don't consider myself creative. And I remember a boss of mine once saying, you actually are creative because I pull things from different places. Because I think and I think MI's helped me with this, but I listen differently. Like when I'm in meetings, I can hear things different than other people are because I tend to hear something below the surface, and then I can pull it up, and then I can sort of attach it to stuff. And I think that's a piece of why the curiosity it's like, it is me trying to figure it out. Like I want to figure out like how to make things better, and trying to pull in all these different ideas. And a lot of times those ideas are not my own, like they're from different voices in the organization or from different people. And that's been something that's important. Yeah.
But also, yes, you sort of always hungry for sort of improving things. You're not shy of recognizing things that perhaps didn't go so well. There were some leadership boo-boos along the way, perhaps, and kind of recognizing those and sort of improving upon those. It sounds like you might say that leadership is something that one can learn or develop or grow the kind of the skills there as well. MI almost became a practical kind of add-on to that, that ability to bring in that skill, because after all, I suppose leaders, clinicians, or whoever are having kind of human conversations, really, I suppose. And so it's really about good conversations.
Yeah, I think that's true. I always think leadership comes down to character and skill, really. There's a book I read a while back when I was writing the MI leadership book by Robert Quinn, Building a Bridge as You Walk on It. And he talks about this type of leader and being externally focused, internally driven. And anyway, there's other components to it. But the point being that I think if you are really open, right, you're accessible and open, and you do really want to listen and hear what people have to say, I do think you can learn to be a good leader. And leaders look like can be different kinds of leaders. I think if your intention of being a leader is to be in charge, or you're wanting a title, or you're wanting, the bigger promotion, I think those types of leaders might be business-wise effective sometimes, like maybe they can meet certain P&L, deliverables or something. But in my mind, that's not a good leader. That's just somebody that's thinking of humans as resources, and not really like, leading a charge behind you where an entire company would follow you. So I do think people can grow into leadership if they want to, and they're open to it. Because I do think it can be a painful process, which is why, when you and I were chatting about like, how does compassion fit into this? I think it's hugely has to fit into that, because you're never going to get 100% on your scorecard as a leader. Never. Even if you're doing really well, there's going to always be things that could be better, and you have to be able to hold both, that you feel really proud of the work you're doing, and knowing that there's a growth edge for you and your company and whatever you're working on.
Two little kind of concepts have come into my mind as I hear you speak there. One is that we're sort of trying to lead with the head and the heart or something. It's sort of, there's a combination there. We want to have that logical, rational ability to, I guess, analyze situations or problems and kind of come up with good solutions and move things forward. But we also want to be able to, kind of connect with the humans that we're working with, understand, empathize, be able to bring compassion to all of that as well. The other sort of combination that I'm hearing a little bit too is as I reflect on some of the compassion focused therapy theory around the emotion regulation systems, which you kind of know about, the sort of the threat system, of course, but also the drive system and soothing. And it sounds like in some ways a really effective leader also taps into both drive and soothing, that we're wanting to be aspirational, we're wanting to sort of achieve and have success, and there's even potentially some competitive sorts of drives there, at least in terms of performance and that sort of thing, but also staying connected to affiliation, relationship, connections, helping people to feel safe and so on. Any thoughts on those two little kind of ideas?
Yeah, no, I think they definitely ring true, because I think you have to have the sort of combination to feel balanced, even like that it's like a three-legged stool to keep you kind of balanced. The part that what's going through my head when you're talking about connecting with people and helping them feel safe too, is I do think the part of the drive slash having the right relationship with folks in a leadership role, to me comes down to something like the Brene Brown stuff, or Jeff Werner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn, talks about compassionate leadership. And he talks specifically about compassion is emotion that is guided by action. And so if the idea is compassion is about relieving suffering, then part of having people feel connected and supported and safe in your organization means being clear, which also means sometimes performancing them out of the organization because they're suffering in the job they have right now, because they're not thriving, they're not happy, they're not doing very well in the job, and it's affecting the company and your colleagues and everybody else. But just that human alone then is taking that home, and they're not happy and their life is affected. And so I think the two, like the drive of like, we have to have goals that we're all agreeing to work on together, is the whole point of of an organization. And then holding that truth while you also have this human in front of you that's the one that's going to have to do that thing. So I don't know if that connects to what you're saying there exactly,
Yeah.
but that's what went through my head, is like, it isn't just having people feel good, right? Or being liking their job. It's being really clear that this is what they want to do. They have the drive and the ambition to want to do this and do it well. And if they aren't, and they're suffering in that space because they're struggling or they're not performing, or they're consistently getting negative feedback, I don't want them to stay there. Not just because I need you out of the company because you're not doing what the company needs you to do, but it's also, as a human, I don't really love to see you suffering. And I think if you go somewhere else, you will find somewhere that you're going to thrive. And this just doesn't happen to be it,
Yeah, very delicate conversations, isn't it? I can see what you mean. There's sort of the motivation is still a compassionate one, but it might mean the delivery of difficult news or difficult feedback, or even sort of more substantial changes to the person and their work and so on. I do like the idea that compassion is about sort of alleviating and preventing suffering, but it's also about flourishing as well. If people feel, if people have managed to, kind of perhaps reduce suffering or suffer a little less or feel a little safer and a little bit more secure, then that is when they can flourish, because they're not now quite so threat system activated, and instead they can, think creatively, explore the world, explore what they might really want to do next, what their aspirations really are. And so flourishing and thriving, I guess, as you said, is sort of kind of a part of compassion in that way as well.
That makes sense. I like that frame of like, it's almost like if you're in pain, if you reduce the pain a little bit, then you can move a little more, or you can go out for a walk or something. And similar, like if you're reducing the threat system enough, then you can start actually being more creative, more whatever you want to bring to the table.
So as a compassionate leader and perhaps bringing some of the MI kind of notions into all of that, I mean, what would you say are some of the things that we can do that will help those who we're leading feel more safe, feel more secure, engage more with, the company and the goals, or the organization and the goals. And any kind of sort of practical tips with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, Peter Senge wrote this thing a while ago, The Fifth Discipline, and he talks about personal vision and company vision. And I think that is very MI consistent, because I think one of the most important things for me with anyone that I'm directly supervising is knowing them well, and knowing what their hopes are for their career. So, one of the first things I do with my direct reports now, for example, is when they're, newly on my team, I want to know, what do you really enjoy doing? And where are you hoping to go in this organization, or just even in your life? Like, if it turns out that somebody grows faster than the company has a job for you, I see my job as helping you get that job. So, for instance, I'm a vice president right now, and if they want to be a vice president and I don't plan on leaving anytime soon, then I do want them to be a vice president, but it might not be here, right? But that is important for me to know. Then when we are working together, every time there's an opportunity to lead a project, I'm matching the project to what they're interested in. And just being clear that that's my goal, is to grow you in that direction. And if for some reason, if it's misaligned, like if your personal vision for yourself is not going to be accomplished in this organization, I want us to have that conversation as soon as we can. Like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen here. So what about what we're doing here are you excited about? And, or, should we really talk about, like, someday you might want to be working somewhere else? Because I don't think that vision is going to happen in this setting. So why that is for MI for me is because then I can hear, anytime there's a struggle that comes up, I can already hear change talk, right? So if someone's like, I'm really not sure I can implement X, Y, or Z, or I don't really know if I, feel like this thing I want to do or can do, then I can ask questions about, well, how does this thing relate to the goal that you have for yourself on X, Y, or Z, right? And I have it in my thinking already that that's their ultimate goal is this, but this task in front of us is just a minor thing on the path to this bigger thing. And I do think that's important when I'm like coaching managers and this stuff. The first thing I ask them when they're talking about the employee that's being difficult or whatever is, what is the employee's goals? What are they wanting? And they're like, I'm not really sure. And I'm like, okay, well, that's, question number one, is like, it's people aren't excited about just company goals. The company goals have to be linked to what they want for themselves. So if this is someone who wants to move up into management, then help them understand how performing right now helps them get into management, right? Or if this is someone who wants to be the best therapist that's ever been, help them understand how this goal helps them be the best therapist that's ever been. And if it doesn't, if the goals don't align, like don't pretend something that isn't true, then figure out like how other pieces of the job can help them grow in this way. And maybe this expectation is just a table stakes to stay here so they can do these other things that they want to do. But I think that's important, because I think that gets lost sometimes, because sometimes it just becomes like the company needs you to get your notes done in 2 days and needs you to see 25 clients a week, and you need to do X, Y, or Z. And that has no context for the person and what they're wanting. So we want to like match it together,
Actually, so on the one hand, it's really being able to know that other person, know sort of some of their strengths, some of the things that perhaps are their lesser strengths or something like that, and also what their own goals and aspirations are. And also helping them to understand the organization and where the organization's coming from, and just the kind of the reality of that or something. There's a sort of an honesty there, I guess, that the leader might offer, that this is kind of where we're all heading and what we're trying to achieve. And these are some of the key things to get there. And then it's a conversation around how does that match or something like that. How do your strengths and so on, your goals and aspirations fit with where we're heading as an organization, and hopefully there's a match there, a good match, and we can sort of bounce off each other and, make sure that the things that people are doing are, kind of working for them and taking them in the direction they want. But maybe there's not a match. And then that's a little conversation as well. How can we help you get to your goals, even if it means not being part of this organization? There might be other places where that can be fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and then, and the other piece that is carving out the box that we can play in, right? Because sometimes there's like, this is a mandate, this is non-negotiable, but then there's places where there is flexibility. So letting them also be really clear, I usually call it like the sandbox you get to play in. It's like, these are things we can't talk about, assuming you want to keep this job. But then here's where there's lots of flexibility, actually. So in this sandbox, like, where do you want to go and how do you want to show up? Because that is where people can have their own creativity and do things differently. The job doesn't have to be cookie cutter, in the way that it's delivered. So I think that piece too is trying to figure out, where does someone have true autonomy to make the job their own, and be really clear about that. And also just be clear, I don't think it's helpful to pretend something isn't true. Like, if you have to work 40 hours and you don't want to work 40 hours, let's just be clear, as long as you want this role, that's something you're signing on for and agreeing to,
I can see that someone who would be wanting to develop their leadership skills, there might even be little ambivalences that arise for them too. One might be this shift to curiosity, which is to be interested in the person and ask questions and explore and get to know them. And they might have their own leadership sustained talk, but that takes too long. I don't have time for those conversations and that sort of thing. And then the other bit is the courage, really, to share things, to have the person fully informed about our organizational goals and intentions. Sometimes people feel like, well, I need to keep some of that to myself, just in case, something. What if I tell them that it has to be 40 hours a week, and then they say, well, I'm leaving and now I don't have staff and I can't find new people because it's so hard to find clinical staff these days, or things like that. So I can imagine that the leader themselves feels some ambivalence about this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And the thing that's interesting is when I first started training my teams in MI, the guiding, following, directing style, we would talk about that, because what I would see is people's natural style as a leader before they start getting feedback falls into the following or directing camp. So you have leaders that are too directive, like they're just blunt, right? Giving you feedback all the time. It's 40 hours, take it or leave it. And they're just direct. And then there's no warmth to it, even though the person is doing that because they're kind and caring and they want to be clear with you. And then we have others that are following, where they're like, whatever you want, sweetheart. And like, you don't want to work 40 hours. That's okay. Like, how about 38? And the two camps really is trying to teach them to be guiding, just like we do in MI, where it's like, how do you be clear with somebody about what is needed, but then also listening to what they're needing. Because, so let's take the 40 hours as an example. Let's say you have a single mom who has to get home for childcare, and so she needs it to be 38 hours. How can that be okay? And then also, how do you bring it to the team so everybody understands that we're doing something different as an accommodation for this mom? And it's not a standard, and we all know we're making an exception, and like you're being sort of transparent about this, instead of just giving in and being like, oh, I don't want to lose her, right? Because I do think it's coaching people, but then as a leader, as a person, you have to get comfortable yourself with how do you give feedback? How do you not avoid conflict? How do you, addressing something the first time you see it is much easier than letting something persist for months. And then now you're having to address something that the whole team is complaining about, that everybody's talking about. This person knows people are complaining about it, and you've let it kind of go now for months. That's much harder conversation and much harder to change. So being really comfortable that feedback is part of this process and leaning into it, but doing it in a way that isn't punitive and hurtful, and, in a way that the person can hear it also is tricky. So I do think as a leader that a lot of times when I hear people say, I don't really want to get promoted to be a leader, I don't want to manage people, it's because they're afraid of that stuff, right? The feedback stuff. Um, and
Mm.
I think it's, I think people want feedback and people want to grow as humans, as employees, as clinicians. And so it's a privilege to be in a space where they trust you enough. I think
Mm.
about like Michael Phelps' coach, like he hires somebody to teach him to be a better swimmer, and he's the best swimmer in the world, and so people want that. So as a leader, you've got to be comfortable being a coach and giving feedback, and not just pretending everything's great all the time, but also affirming and saying when things are great. But it does take a lot on you, because especially when you're empathetic, because you can feel it. I was actually having a coaching conversation this morning with my managers in my organization, and one of the leaders was talking about a clinician of hers who got we have feedback from our clients all the time, and she got some negative feedback from a client and was really hard on herself about it. And the manager was asking me, like, how might MI have helped me with her with giving her this feedback? She's like, and the manager was saying, because I feel like I didn't really do well there and I could have done better. And I stopped for a minute and I said, it's interesting. I'm having this conversation later today about compassion leadership. And what I just noticed is both of you were not sort of tapping into your own self-compassion. Like she's a horrible therapist, even though this is the first feedback she's gotten all year and has seen many clients and is actually a fantastic therapist. But she went to the whole shame spiral thing because of one feedback. And then the manager went to, well, because she was, suffering or not feeling good about the feedback, then I must be not a great leader. I could have been doing that better. It's just, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that the pattern was the
Mm.
same, but how important it is to be okay with, like, yeah, this is hard and it's going to hit you hard and you're going to feel the emotion of your employee, but also you can do it. You just might have to practice and get feedback, and you probably are going to screw up sometimes and feel really bad about that. And that's okay, because then you'll do better next time. And it's just the human
Mm.
condition to not be perfect.
And it's the human condition to have that threat system activated, isn't it? I guess that's sort of in the CFT kind of conceptualization of that, of what you just described. Yeah, it's sort of threat system activation for both parties. There's a sort of a social threat, basically, that, both of them are worried about, kind of how they might be seen by others, or whether they'll be approved of, or, whether they'll be rejected, socially, or even ostracized or something like that. Not necessarily at a conscious level, but just at that very deeply ingrained primitive brain sort of level. And straight away in comes self-criticism. And so the clinician is kind of critical of themselves, kind of with this negative feedback, kind of starting to make sort of more global statements. I'm a bad clinician. Then the leader is sort of thinking to themselves, oh, I did that wrongly. I should have done better. I'm a bad leader. Perhaps the client, whoever gave the feedback, is thinking to themselves, I didn't do well enough as a client. Like sometimes
Right.
it's all these humans kind of having threat system. And it really speaks to, yes, how do we manage some of that, the anxiety, the self-consciousness, the concern for wanting to do a good job, worried about how other people will see us. And I can relate to that myself a lot, and it probably is the biggest barrier, really, sometimes, to having those more difficult conversations in a timely manner, to be able to actually do what you were saying before, to pick up on some sort of feedback that we need to give, but giving it straight away rather than procrastinating or postponing or avoiding those conversations. Because I think people like feedback, but I think people also feel ambivalent about feedback. It's sort of hard sometimes. We do a lot of we do things like routine outcome measurement, which I think you all do as well, perhaps. And we also look at, sort of early dropout rates and things like that. And sometimes there is tricky feedback there in terms of, X% of your clients attended 1 or 2 sessions and didn't rebook, sort of thing. And having that conversation, I feel myself nervous going into those conversations, worried that I might hurt the person's feelings, not knowing that it's a good thing to do and to monitor all of that, but just hesitate and then perhaps put it off till next time. I wonder how we can conjure up the kind of curious, courageous sort of thing that you really seem to possess, in abundance, although I know that you're very modest about it as well. But that's interesting, the courage, the down regulating of threat system, and the really engaging this kind of soothing system, drive system combination.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's tricky. I don't know that people, like you said, I don't know that people love feedback. I do think people like to grow and want to be better and better and better. Like I think that's a core belief I have, is most people are trying to do a good job, and most people are trying hard to grow in the way that they can. And as you were talking, I was just reflecting on a story, that leader I was telling you about, Dr. Kuntz. When I was a newer manager, I had a therapist who's now a good friend of mine that I was supervising, and she was fantastic. She was fantastic with the kids. Like, if I ever needed her to see anyone, she could really see and provide therapy to nearly everyone, and was just a fantastic therapist. And her notes were always late, and her notes were not always great, because she just didn't prioritize that. And I remember my supervisor, and I didn't talk to her about this stuff, because I was like, I just don't want to talk to her about the notes, because I don't want to diminish how amazing she is, because she actually is very, very good. And I was talking about this note stuff, just feels dismissive. Like, it just feels like I'm missing how talented she is by bringing this up. And Dr. Kuntz said to me, do you think she likes having an asterisk next to her name? And I go, what do you mean? He's like, you're saying so-and-so is great, except, and there's an except next to her name. He goes, do you think she would want that? I was like, no, this person wouldn't want that. She would want to be, her name is, she'd want me just to say she's great, period. Right. And he said, well, you're denying her that chance right now, because you're not giving her that feedback. You're not sharing with her the asterisks, because, for all good reasons and all these nice things you're saying, but you're not giving her the chance. So that was early learning for me, is that's not fair. It's not fair for her. And it's something that I say to my team now, is my hope is when I talk about you to anybody, you could walk in the room and sit down, especially if I were talking to my boss about you. And what I'd be saying to him, I'd already had said to you. It would be that transparent. There would never be this, I see your performance differently in a different room that you're not in. Because I want you to have as much feedback as I can give you, so that you can do with it what you will, and be as good as you can be. And with this, to finish the story, when I did start giving this therapist that feedback, she of course turned it around. And then, anytime I was asked how was so-and-so, I'd be like, she's great. She's amazing. There's nothing other than I'd love her to promote her and have her start supervising other people and training other people. She's just fantastic. And there was never an asterisk anymore. Right.
No more asterisks. Yeah.
That's what I mean. And that's for me too. I want someone, even though I don't love to get feedback sometimes, because it hurts and I wish I was perfect, but I don't want to miss out on the opportunity that there's something you're seeing that I'm not aware of. And if I am aware of it, I'd love to chat with you about, I don't know what to do about this. I know, for instance, I have typos constantly. I'm bad at it. I send out, there's funny stories about me sending emails that said, come talk to me about, I thought I wrote payroll, but it actually said parole, so someone's coming into my office ready to talk about someone on parole. And I was talking about, there was an issue with payroll. So I know this about myself. And so if someone who points out hey, your typos are a problem, I'd love to talk to them about it's been a problem since I was in elementary school. So I'm not really sure, what to do about it. I'm not sure how to improve upon it. I've tried, in certain situations, I can make a more concrete effort. I can also put editing stuff into place, but I'd love a collaborator with me on, yeah, I don't want that to be my reputation, but I'm also tried and it's really hard. And so do you have thoughts I haven't thought of, or, here's what I have put in place. Is there things I'm missing? Like even that having a partner in my growth is useful, right? But avoiding telling me that I have typos doesn't bring in the opportunity for us to talk about it.
Mm.
I was gonna say, because I'm not gonna bring it up. I'm gonna be like, "Hi, I'm Colleen. I have typos." Like, so but
Yeah. Yes, I really do appreciate that kind of reframe in the mind, the asterisk one, this idea that when we don't provide feedback about something that we've noticed about the person, then we're preventing them the opportunity of, knowing that, understanding that, bringing awareness to it, maybe even bringing change to it. Because there are different forms and functions of self-criticism too, let alone also, how you're describing it. I mean, it is possible to have, compassionate encouragement, self-correction, self-improvement. Not all self-criticism is bad. The self-hating, kind of stuff is more problematic, but it is actually quite good. Michael Phelps or Serena Williams or whoever, they often will be very good at noticing the things that they're not doing so well and then practicing it. And so as a leader, to just shift the kind of the idea in our head and to think, okay, well, I really do have this asterisk in my mind about this person. I need to share that so that they have a chance to improve on it. And yeah, things like notes, keeping to time, having the letters back to the medical practitioners or the referrers. There's lots of different bits and pieces that really, yeah, it's great to just kind of share that and work on it and so on. It's tricky when it's something that's going to be really difficult for the person to change, like, for example, a long held, kind of struggle with spelling, for example. And so, sometimes we're sort of thinking about that piece of it as well. But yeah, sort of seeing if there's a way to kind of not have asterisks. I really, really appreciate that.
yeah.
So last sort of little more formal question. Where do you think self-compassion does fit in with all of this? It sounds like you would see it at kind of multiple levels, that the leader is being compassionate, but we're also wanting to bring self-compassion in for the person that we're working with, in for the leader. Self-compassion seems important across the board.
Yeah, I think for sure it is. And I mean, in my mind, self-compassion always goes with growth. Like if you're going to try anything, you want to learn a new dance move, self-compassion has to be right with you, right? Because you're going to look foolish and you need to be okay with the fact that you're looking foolish because you're trying to achieve something. Um, you know, I think it's something to build and remind, because as much as it's important also to give feedback, it's also important to remind people what you notice they're doing really well at, and acknowledge that too, and like help them reflect on that. So like the therapist we were talking about is reminding her, like, this is the first thing you've heard, and you've had 100 clients that have given you really positive reviews. And what does that say to you, to help build that internal dialogue of actually you are a good therapist, and but and there's growth for all of us, like whatever that statement is. I also think as a leader, it's important just to be vulnerable. Thing I do a lot is tell stories about myself and my career. So when somebody's, feeling bad about, I just managed this person and it didn't go so well, it's like, yeah, being a leader is super hard and we don't get it right every time. I know I certainly haven't got it right every time. And here's a little story about, something I did, mostly just to say it's okay to not be perfect, but also to hold up and, your intention was good and you were trying hard, and we're not perfect, and that's just the human condition. So trying to, build in that with whatever you're asking the person to reflect on. a lot of times, like when I'm doing evaluations with folks, I ask them to do their self-reflection first, and most of them go to how they need to improve. And I pause them and say, before we go there, I want you to first just spend some time on what you've done well this year. And that part of self-compassion, I think, is important too, is like just acknowledge that, there's growth edges for all of us, of course, but let's also talk about, if you were yourself's best friend, what would you be saying to yourself? And you'd be saying, you actually did a really good job this year. And there's like 2 things you wish you'd done better.
Mm,
So just building in structure there, but also modeling it, I think, is important. And then
mm.
just even for, myself as a leader, I have to remind myself, and I luckily have a great support system, because my husband partner will always be my biggest cheerleader. So I'll say something bad about, like, I had a bad day, or I did this really bad. And he's like my self-compassion voice and telling me, like, well, actually, you're really good. And like, or what, you did a great job. And I'm reminding myself, oh, right. Yeah. I don't totally suck. Okay. Like, yeah.
Yes, the self-compassion there is actually made up of many different kind of components. There's sort of self-appreciation and self-affirmation that's sort of in there. There's perhaps a little bit of self-forgiveness or something like that along the way, and then there's kind of self-encouragement and keeping on going, and I appreciate that idea of self-compassion and growth always go together. Like we said earlier on, when we're really suffering or we're deep in our more shame-based self-criticism, very difficult to grow, very difficult to sort of progress and move forward with things, because we're busy feeling small and trying to hide away and just sort of inhibited and feeling bad about ourselves. And so self-compassion and growth really are kind of, close cousins, siblings, maybe even.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think your support system is important there too. Like, I think
Yeah.
about when I'm in a shame spiral, the thing I learned from Brene Brown's work is, like, the best way to turn off shame is to speak shame, but you have to have like a trusted circle. So I'll reach
Yeah.
out to a colleague at work I trust, or a good friend of mine. And I don't actually reach out to my husband, because he's just going to tell me all, everything that's great about me. And I need someone that's more balanced in those moments. So I know to,
Yes.
like, call out, a girlfriend of mine, and she'll be like, yeah, didn't go so well, but it's the first time you haven't done so well on that thing, but yeah, that you could have done a little better. And that balance helps me, like, get out of shame and be like, okay,
Mm,
like, now I can actually think about this. So just your
mm,
support system, I think, is
yeah.
as important as your own internal dialogue, I think.
Mm. Yes, your husband is a bigger Colleen Marshall fan than I am, I think, isn't he? he'll
Yeah.
always he'll always say, but he is good in that way. But no, you raise a really important point, which, from a compassion focused therapy point of view, is the third flow of compassion, really, isn't it? Is receiving compassion and opening yourself up to that, and being able to sort of have people in one's life that you feel safe with to kind of go to in these times, because you're also wanting to try to sort of work with those asterisks as they appear,
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you mentioned your book. So what? Just tell us that. What's the title there? I'll put it in the notes as well. But yeah, what's the book?
Yeah, so it's motivational interviewing for leaders, of helping professions is the full title. It's by myself and Annette Nielsen Sogard. And it really, high level, is just how to apply MI in a leadership context, of the specific pieces of MI and where it fits with MI, um, and what parts you might want to modify when you're bringing MI into a leadership role.
Hmm.
Um,
Are there other ways as well that people could engage with your work that you would suggest?
So there's a nonprofit organization called Milo, Motivational Interviewing for Leaders and Organizations, that was started by MINT members, Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers members. That we have a LinkedIn group and we have a Facebook group. And it's just like-minded folks that are all thinking about how MI can help leadership in organizations. So we have practice groups, we have webinars, we have just, asking each other questions in the social media. places. And there's another book written by some other members of Milo, also out there, called "Am I Lead?" That is a little different than my book, but has different components that are somewhat similar. So there's definitely, it's a free nonprofit organization. Folks can join if they're interested. And we have some recordings of lectures we've done and practice groups we've done that people can access on our Vimeo account too, if they're interested.
Yes, and your book is certainly an excellent read. I'd recommend that, and I am hoping to, in 2024, to engage more with Milo. So you might have to put up with me joining some of those practice groups and so on, depending on the time conversion. I think is going to be the interesting bit, but.
Practice groups. So for those, because of the time zone thing, so you can, if you can't come during the day, the time, certainly you can watch recordings if you want to.
The practice groups are recorded as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for offering us your time and wisdom to discuss MI, compassion, and leadership. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been fun. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.